Okay, the incomparable Leonid Odessa. Applause, please. A nice Jewish boy from Odessa, and who could be more relevant to the previous session on crime and the Odessa subculture of gangsters and the romanticization for which Joseph and Barbara were much criticized in the 1920s. Let's now go on to the next session. And as I said before, we only have two speakers tonight. Professor Koko has cancelled his lecture. I'm now going to hand over to Haim Sperber from the West Galilee College, who will introduce the speakers. Haim, the floor is yours.
Hello, everybody. Our session is a short one because we have only two presenters. The first one is Elizabeth Anna Abosch. She is from the University of Illinois. She is a PhD candidate in Russian history at the University of Illinois in Urbana. Her research is focused on the history of the criminal and urban song genre from 1920 to 1980, then the creation, function, and control of the popular and mass song in the Soviet Union. Elizabeth, you've got 20 minutes, please.
Thank you. How fitting to end with Yosef and begin with his kind of redheaded stepchild, much maligned descendant, the late Soviet Blatnaya Pesnya. My presentation is called Moldavanka on the Magnitofon, the music of Arkadii Severnyi and singing the streets of Old Odessa in the Soviet apartment block. Arkadii Severnyi declared before his performance of the NEP-era song, "It is terribly loud in the Schneersenholm," that he and his ensemble were embarking on a long journey around Old Odessa. Before a performance of another song, one of his musicians asked the audience to imagine for themselves Odessa Mama 1918, a small holy déclassé bar. Listen, do you know how real bandits sing? We can only say that these songs were recorded between the mid-1960s and 1980. And curiously, not the first decades of the Soviet period as their content would have you believe. Arkadii Severnyi was a popular voice of amateur recording on the Magnitofon and a performer of Blatnaya Pesnya, criminal and urban song with roots in the pre-revolutionary and NEP years. In his songs, he often bragged that, "In Odessa I was born, and in Odessa I will die, and I lived in the noisy city of Odessa where there are a lot of thieves and rubes." However, not only was the man behind the voice not from Odessa, and more, not from pre-revolutionary or NEP-era Odessa, he was actually born in 1939, Arkadii Severnyi did not exist. He was a persona created by the amateur vocalist Arkadii Zvezdin and his colleagues in the underground song scene. Zvezdin was from Ivanovo and recorded primarily in Leningrad. This presentation delves into how legendary and literary Old Odessa was evoked through Severnyi's Blatnaya Pesnya for a late Soviet youth audience. Due to the difficulty of finding the audience for underground song subcultures, like Arkadii Severnyi's Blatnaya Pesnya, I juxtapose my discussion of his music with contemporary Soviet press sources in which the group most associated with listening to and amateur performance of Blatnaya Pesnya are youth the state deemed as petty criminals or hooligans. The history and legacy of previous performers of Old Odessa informed the persona and performance of Arkadii Severnyi, which filtered the world of the late Soviet hooligan through criminal song on magnetic tape and brought the lawless, noisy street Odessa Street to the quiet, orderly Soviet bloc. I consider from Michel Foucault that the experience of listening to Severnyi's Blatnaya Pesnya constituted a heterochronotopia, a space that exists in relation to and as a reflection of contemporary society, a so-called counter-site, where power is reinterpreted and inverted. These spaces are also temporally bound to the past. In the world of Old Odessa and its capital, the historical and made legendary Jewish slum of Moldavanka, The derided and shamed behaviors of the late Soviet hooligan became celebrated traits of thief anti-heroes, and alienation from the Soviet project could be expressed freely. Two idealized worlds, the one presented to youth in Blatnaya Pesnya and the idealized Soviet domestic sphere, appear in press sources as locked in battle for sonic control of the suburb. This research is informed by scholars of Odessa myth and memory, such as Roshana Sylvester and Jared Taney, scholars of Soviet popular songs, such as Jared Stanton-Smith, S. Frederick Starr, David McFadyen, Rachel Platonov, J. Martin Daughtry, Brian Horn, and Maxim Kravchinsky, and theory from Michel Foucault and musicologist Martin Stokes. The memoirs of underground magnetic tape distributor Rudolf Fuchs and Mikhail Sheleg's biography of Arkadii Severnyi also inform this work. From the early Soviet decades, authors such as Isak Babel, Ilfin Petrov, and Alexander Kuprin gave life to the image of criminal Odessa. Authors, playwrights, and directors like Veniamin Kaverin, Nikolai Pogodin, and Nikolai Ek popularized the concept of the singing criminal. Song became a signifier of criminality, especially connected to the legends of Odessa in the work of course, the performer Leonid Ityosov, whom Arkadii Severnyi, in one of his versions of Sedeskova Kichmana, or From the Odessa Jail, named the Papa of late Soviet Blatnaya Pesnya. Reflecting the Jewish identities of Odessa's early propagandists, Jewishness became inseparable from the city's criminal allure. However, it was not the Jewishness of the burgeoning middle class of the 19th century, nor the Jewishness of Odessa's well-known Zionist figures. It was the Jewishness of Moldavanka. Moldavanka was considered, according to Roshana Sylvester, to be a distinct and peculiar little world where the normal and proper relations of society were turned upside down. In the popular imagination, the center of Odessa was the chaotic Moldavanka, not the green and gridded city center with its opera house. This image of Odessa thus inverted hierarchies of power twofold, figuratively in the elevation of thieves into kings and queens of the street, and geographically. Odessa was already far from Moscow and St. Petersburg, Russian and Soviet centers of power, and then its own center of power was its slum. Moldavanka and Odessa in general was heavily associated with music and song thanks to Leonid Ityosov. Before he became the blonde star of Veselye Ryabята and Soviet Estrada, he was the dark-haired performer of criminal Odessa in Soviet musical theater. He described Moldavanka in his memoirs. Sound ruled the senses even during conflict between anti-Semitic rioters and Jewish self-defense groups. There were, quote, screams of horror, pleas for mercy, wild cackling, and all of that without music? Of course, with music. Look, from a third-floor balcony flies a piano. Bang, on the pavement, such a chord as you've never heard before, unquote. After the thaw, the world of old Odessa again came into vogue. From the 1960s, Odessa featured as a setting for films, and others often starred, obviously, Odessan characters. This is not to mention the rise of the comedic and musical criminal in late Soviet comedies. Writers and critics in the popular press noted with aggravation the revival of NEP-related and criminal themes in youth music trends. Musicians like Arkadii Severnyi, who catered to these trends, took the easy and beaten road to ephemeral popularity. The musicologist Leonid Pereberzev wrote in 1965. He referred to a certain type of song, quote, the majority of them styled on criminal folklore and in their own way, continuing the tradition of pre-revolutionary petit bourgeois and Nepman estrada. It is unbearable to listen how the works of this kind are sung in cozy Moscow apartments without coquettishness, unquote. He criticized their songs glorifying the adventures of their neighborhood thieves, window robbers, safecrackers, creepers, jailbreakers, and the ongoing series of others of equally elegant behavior. Music, according to musicologist Martin Stokes, reflects knowledge already there of imagined or other places. This is a sonically bound heterochronotopia where the signs of the dominant culture are there and just recognizable as such, but constitute a quite different subversive whole. Just as the augmented second interval can evoke the so-called Orient and, quote, informs us in the context of our own musical language of an imagined world of violence and repressed sexuality, unquote, Old Odessa is defined by klezmer sound and melodies reminiscent of NEP and the pre-revolutionary period. Severnyi's song Sim Sorok, or 740, with lyrics by his colleague and amateur folklorist Rudolf Fuchs, borrowed its melody from a pre-revolutionary Freilich. The title, the supposed time of arrival of a train to Odessa, and the lyrics poke fun at the story of Theodor Herzl and his promise to visit Odessa on his search for a suitable Jewish homeland, though he never arrived. In the song, Severnyi promises that they would continue to wait for Herzl all the same. And let's try to play an excerpt. If you can't hear it, let me know in the chat, although I'm not sure what I would be able to do without it. Whoops.
I don't hear anything.
How about now?
Still nothing.
There should be an option to, oh, sure, okay, here we go.
Старый наш, славный наш Акицын паровоз идет с собой вагоны, идет с собой вагоны, набитые людям, будто сеном воз. Он выйдет из вагона и двинет вдоль перрона, на голове его роскошный котелок, в больших глазах зеленых на восток горит одесский огонек.
Severnyi and his colleagues used the sounds of the early 20th century in their repertoire to further evoke the past. Often this meant creating imitations of early Soviet jazz and estrada hits. Alyosha from the Caucasus, the hero of early estrada star Pyotr Lyshenko's eponymous song, is in Severnyi's version a thief from Odessa. While roaming the streets, he stumbles upon a postal train robbery conducted by none other than Babel's Benyakrik. Instead of a smart and mighty guy, as Lyshenko describes him, Severnyi's Alyosha is smart and blatnoy. The song tells the story of Krik and his henchmen inviting Alyosha into their gang. The final refrains declare, "That's me, Alyosha, my best friend is Benyakrik." The phrase "Luchi drug moy есть Benyakrik" is a wink and a nod to Odessa Russian and its Yiddishisms. In his musical feuilleton series, songs about criminal life in Odessa are supplemented with anecdotes in which Severnyi performs each role, characters stereotypically named Haim, Sonia, Manka, and more, with silly voices. He assures the audience that one can no more find such places and people in modern Odessa, but that, quote, "I can say that all of her characters are certainly real," unquote. His use of the present tense when assuring listeners of the supposed existence of such characters underscores their sonic existence for the duration of the performance, during which their world was brought to life. Severnyi was able to employ previously established sonic and musical, literary, and cultural associations to project authenticity in his performance that allowed listeners to imagine that his music obscured space and time, and that he was truly singing to them from Old Odessa. Some listeners, and Zakashchiki, listeners who requested songs through letters, believed Severnyi was an immigrant who left Odessa for New York during the Russian Civil War. Others were sure that they had spent their prison time in Kolyma with him. Sergei Maklakov, who produced his records from the early 1970s until Arkadii Severnyi's death in 1980, described his first impression of the man's voice. Quote, "About this I was sure, that he was, on first listening, a real jailbird, a perp from Moldavanka," unquote. Musical ensembles and listeners eagerly participated in exalting Old Odessa and its moral, political, and geographical inversion of the Soviet world. With an ensemble from Kiev, Severnyi sang without Podol, historic Jewish part of Kiev, "Kiev is not possible, like Holy Vladimir without its cross. It is, after all, a piece of Odessa." Odessa, on the margins of empire both Russian and Soviet, and the Podol, on the margins of Kiev, were connected by a further marginal Odessa-centric Jewish identity. The topography and important spaces that populate the musical image of Old Odessa are unique. The most commonly known locations, such as the Opera House, the Potemkin Steps, its synagogues and cathedrals, are all absent in the heterochronotopia of criminal Old Odessa. Life is lived on the streets, in restaurants, in bars, and behind bars. The song I Stopped by the Odessa Tavern twists an early 20th century British music hall song about a young woman missing her former lover. It is transformed in Severnyi's version into a drunkard's anthem. In the first verse, the other men in the room, most likely other musicians, shout the name of the tavern, Gambrinus, an Odessa bar from the mid-19th century, which, like Café Fanconi, still exists in some form today. And I hope that this is also audible.
Зашел в Одесский кабачок,
Гамбринус.
вино там стоит пятачок. Я скинул с бутылкой там, сижу наедине. Не плачь, милашка, обо мне. Так будь здорова, дорогая, я надолго уезжаю. А когда вернусь, не знаю, так просил прощай.
The call and response nature of the song emphasizes the similar reciprocal relationship of noise that Blatnaya Pesnya called for from its audience. Intoxication and noisemaking were the prerequisites of participation in the revelry of Old Odessa, and they also happened to be the common pastimes of the Soviet hooligan. Shared involvement in petty criminality connected underground Blatnaya Pesnya and hooligans. Old Odessa, as performed by Severnyi, resembled a hooligan lifestyle. In a society in which all were expected to be active agents in the building of socialism, to refuse to participate was scandalous. Hooligans threatened the peace of Soviet domestic life, and their apathy towards socialism and their pursuit of individual pleasure made them enemies and social outcasts. Like the thieves of Old Odessa, the domains of hooligan disorder were streets and communal spaces. Hooliganism was a young adult male problem, and hooligan behavior distanced these young men from their families and proper and healthy social bonds. Soviet press from the 1960s to the 1980s depicted the typical hooligan with remarkable consistency in both news and fiction as not only avid listeners of Blatnaya Pesnya, but also as the genre's loudest propagandists. Izvestia reported on the Zakharenko family of Karaganda, whose apartment in a newly built complex was every evening, quote, filled with unknown boys. There they drank, made noise, and screamed criminal songs, unquote. Noise-making hooligans featured in news stories and as stock characters in fiction. Literaturnaya Gazeta told the story of a veteran who waged war with a man named Semyonov who moved into her apartment building. At Semyonov's place, quote, criminal songs thundered through the whole apartment, unquote. Much like state hostility towards youth deemed as hooligans, at that time Khrushchev declared underground musicians to be anathema to the Soviet project. Prison sentences relating to the recording and distribution of underground song were long. According to Foucault, the boundaries of a heterochronotopic space are defined by certain permission and certain gestures. Thus, it was expected that while Severnyi was drunk while recording, listeners would also be drunk together. Although the repertoire was indelibly connected to the persona of Severnyi and the maintenance of a recognizable Old Odessa pastiche, the performer behind the mask, Arkadii could certainly be counted among the hooligans. By 1971, he refused to record without a bottle of vodka at his side. His Alcoholics hymn describes the effects of collective drinking. After all, vodka makes the collective strong. It pushes you into cultivating a passion for collectivism. He who drinks vodka alone does not recognize the collective. Just as authorities perceived hooligans as living against the currents of correct Soviet life, the sonic world presented by Severnyi with Old Odessa as its capital made anti-heroes out of such characters. In the song Fried Chicken, a NEP-era Jewish speculator is arrested. He comedically describes himself, I am no Soviet, I am no cadet, I am a chicken commissar. I never did any shooting, I never did any interrogating, I only pecked at my seeds. The songs mocked authority and presented a world where criminals and hooligans ruled, but this inverted mirror image of the Soviet world would not have existed without its reflection. Amateur recording occupied, to quote Martin Daughtry, the vast gray area that lay between illegal opposition and active promotion of the regime, the area in which the majority of Soviet experience unfolded. This did not mean that the genre was ideologically harmless. Severnyi's Blatnaya Pesnya centered low morals and pleasure, which are, according to Martin Stokes, a significant arena of political experience and a focus of control. The potential of song to incite disorder was well understood in public discourse. In a society in which, to quote Jared Taney, music and humor needed to play a socially and morally constructive role, the interjection of old Odessa into the life of the new Soviet man was harmful. There was, according to Jared Taney again, no room to honor a Judeo-kleptocracy like old Odessa, which inverted Soviet morals and values and could be spread as infectiously as a song. The subversive power of Arkadii Severnyi's Blatnaya Pesnya was in its presentation of an alternate world where pleasure was ideology and inaction was protest, a sonic world which could be noisily brought to the most intimate spaces of Soviet life, kitchens, living rooms, and courtyards, through listening, performance, and the repetition of a simple and catchy tune. That is it for me. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. We are waiting for some questions. Please put them on the chat and we'll deal with them later after Marina's talk. The second presenter is Marina Sapritsky-Nahum. She is a visiting fellow at the program of the study of religion and non-religion and the anthropology department at the London School of Economics. She is conducting an ethnographical research for the project New Directions in Transnational Jewish Identities, Russian-speaking Jewry in London, and working on organizing and presenting the collected data. Marina, please.
I don't see her, do you?
No, I don't, but I saw her a minute ago.
Yeah, she was there.
Yeah. Well, I think we'll wait a minute.
I don't see her in the list of participants. I think she might have got disconnected.
Okay, I think we'll wait a minute. And
Let's have questions for Elizabeth first.
okay.
Actually, just I received an email from Marina. She says her internet connection is down. She will try to log in from her phone in case she can't come back. Is she able to email her presentation?
Okay, so I suggest we'll forward some questions to Elizabeth. Anybody, please.
I have a question about Soviet counterculture and how the counterculture in the 60s and 70s relates to a similar romanticization of the gangsters and Odessa in the counterculture of the 20s. And coming back to Joseph and company.
It's actually quite interesting. It's something that I focus on quite heavily in what will become my dissertation once I'm able to travel at the end of this pandemic. But the music critics, musicologists, and sort of cultural authorities connected with the state in the 1960s and 70s were incredibly aware that this was kind of a fad that was happening again. And why it was happening, they don't seem to know. And I suspect for myself that it has something to do with the similar political atmospheres of the 20s and 30s and the 60s and 70s, where you have this period of violence followed by this freer period, which is then kind of, the products of this freer period are then kind of locked down again by restrictions on cultural production and expression. So we have in the 20s and 30s, we have NEP, and then the Stalinist period, right? And in the 60s and 70s, we have the thaw, followed by Brezhnev, who not only whose regime not only kind of locked down culture again, but also he was incredibly litigious. Like his regime was incredibly litigious towards young people the state called hooligans, and I believe some large percentage of men in the Soviet Union had been to jail at that point for hooliganism. I believe it's 1 in 8. I'm not quite sure right now, but yeah, I would say that the atmospheres are so similar that people, even at the time, they recognized that it was happening.
We've got 2 more questions for you. One of them is from Svetlana. What is known about Rudolf Fuchs? Did he have some connections to Odessa, or just reproduce his fantasy of Odessa?
That's also an interesting question. At some point, he immigrated to the United States, where he lives now. I've been trying to get in touch with him. I haven't quite figured out how. But from what I know, his grandparents, I believe it was grandparents, converted from Judaism to Christianity in the Russian Empire. And I don't want to speculate if that's why he had a little bit of a chip on his shoulder, being an amateur folklorist of Odessa. But in his memoirs, he does have stories of traveling to, Langeron Beach and recording criminal songs from people on the beach with his kind of brand new contraband Philips recorder. And then he leaves them for a moment, and he comes back to these people who were singing him criminal songs. And predictably, they've stolen the recorder and they're gone. So he was, I would say, Rudolf Fuchs and later on Sergei Maklakov were a lot more involved in the creation of this persona than the singer himself was. I think the most important thing about Arkadii Zvezdin was his voice, and he often didn't write his own lyrics. Fuchs and Maklakov wrote them for him, and they decided what instruments would be played with him and how he would sing it. So they played an outsized role in the maintenance and creation of this persona in this world. But unfortunately, due to the nature of this underground culture, it's very difficult to find out more information about them or the other musicians who were involved in this.
Okay, and we got another question from Mirja. Is there musical innovation in the songs, or are they all as similar to the 20s as the examples?
I would say a lot of them are quite similar to the 1920s. He does a little bit with kind of contemporary song, but as far as him recording this kind of Odessa song and criminal song, they try to stick to the source material. They use basically play with a bayan or a piano and a fiddler and a drummer usually, and nothing other than that. Although there are some songs where it's kind of comedically made in a new style, and they call it a new song, where they take the melody from an old song and play it with, let's say, a synth or kind of an emerging kind of electronic instrument. But mostly concerning the criminal song, they do stick to kind of a formula. He was a little bit known before this for singing sort of in a similar way to other bards singing poetry. He liked to sing Yesenin poetry. And so that sounds much different than his Odessa song.
Okay, and we got a third question from Alexis. What can be said about anti-Semitic or anti-Judaic stereotypes in the blood songs?
This is something that I'm still trying to sort of think about because essentially this world that they present is one where this great tragedy of the Holocaust did not happen at all. And I'm not sure at this point how much this reflects the broader Soviet attitude towards conceiving of victims of the Holocaust as Soviet victims of the war and not as Jews. But there was a sense that this was kind of a costume that was being put on. It wasn't an authentic homage to Jewish culture, Jewish identity. In fact, his biographer mentions that with one of the ensembles that he performed with, one of the leaders of the ensemble was a Jew, and he actually changed his name to sound not Jewish. He had a not Jewish stage name that he performed with while he performed these so-called Jewish songs. And there is a song, in fact, that he played with an ensemble from Kiev, where one of the musicians, I'm not sure who it was, is actually a Yiddish speaker, and they kind of poke fun at Severnyi's kind of inability to speak Yiddish and his kind of Jewish costume that he puts on by dedicating a song to him in Yiddish called To the Head Anti-Semite Arkadii Severnyi. And another short anecdote, if you listen to a version by Vysotsky of the song Здравствуйте, мое почтение, there's a line in it that is Yiddish. Azukter makter ik bena fartove yid, which means I am a lucky Jew, but in Severnyi's version, because he can't speak Yiddish, it's as if he doesn't even try. It's just kind of a jumble of songs that turns out to be Azukter makter abgenak faktove yad. And it doesn't sound like anything at all, but it sounds Jewish enough.
I think Marina's waiting to give a talk. If there are more questions, then Haim will take them
Of course.
At the end. Okay, so Marina is waiting. She cannot give a presentation for technical reasons, but she will speak to us. Marina.
Hi, everyone. I've managed to fix my computer. Apologies about that. It crashed at the most inappropriate times. So let me try to do that now. If something happens, I will try to log in from a different computer. Can everyone see that?
Yes, we can.
Thank you, Elizabeth, for that great presentation. And I loved your music. I wish I included some Hava Nagila in my piece. I will start. The title of my paper today is Jewish Revival in Post-Soviet Odessa, Identities, Communities, and Places. Historically, Odessa was a famously Jewish city, not only because of its impressively large Jewish population in the 19th and early 20th century, but because that population was both well integrated into the cosmopolitan fabric of the metropolis and relatively empowered. Large numbers of Jews participated actively in the city's social, economic, political, and educational institutions and made significant contributions to its cultural and intellectual life. A lot of attention has been given in the last few days on the historical dimensions of Odessa's cosmopolitanism and modernism. And today I want to look at these topics through the prism of post-Soviet Jewish Odessa in my discussion of identities, communities, and places. For the purpose of today's talk, I am interested in the ways in which present-day Odessans, Jewish leaders, and the media draw parallels between the process of Jewish revival and cosmopolitanism. In some instances, seeing new Jewish practices and the visibility of Jewish Renaissance, in quotation marks, as a confirmation of the city's cosmopolitan traits, but also as a compromise and even a threat to that same legacy of the city. Some Jewish Odessans believe the emergence of present-day forms of Jewish expression can be incorporated within the city's long-standing ethos of tolerance. For them, the current development of Jewish life is thus interpreted as a means of rebuilding the Jewishness of Odessa, which stands as one of the defining elements of the city's cosmopolitanism. Indeed, many religious leaders and activists see themselves as continuing Odessa's legendary Jewishness in a cosmopolitan fashion. However, others, especially in the light of mass Jewish immigration, especially in light of mass Jewish immigration, these changes in the orientations of Jewish practices, together with growing nationalism, increased religiosity, and the dominance of orthodoxy within Odessa's religious life, signal a sad decline in the city's cosmopolitan virtues. For them, the religiosity of communal life that is being dominant is regarded as a foreign to their city and their own understandings of what it means to be Jewish. I've just put a few pictures together from my field work with brief descriptions just to put some description towards what I'm talking about. A brief overview of Jewish life. On the first day of the conference, Israel Bartal reminded us that in the 1880s, Odessa's Jewish population was the second largest Jewish community next to Warsaw and the first in the Pale. In 2007, I visited Warsaw with a group from Odessa. They recalled how Odessa seemed much more Jewish to them, not only because of the sheer number of Jewish institutions, but in the vibrant zeal of the people and the visibility of public celebrations, Jewish holidays, and Jewish culture on display. I indeed thought of Hanukkah celebrations by the Duc de Richelieu at the top of the Potemkin stairs, the street musicians playing popular Jewish songs Hava Nagila as they displayed a sign asking for change, and the numerous advertisements by the Opera House for Jewish tours of Odessa. I remember the parade of men carrying beautifully decorated Torah scrolls on the Jewish street during Simchat Torah celebration, and how Chabad congregants sang Yechad Dodi at the welcoming of Shabbat with as much energy and enthusiasm as if it was their national anthem. Today, Jewish life is indeed a vibrant and visible part of Odessa. Although Jews no longer make up 30+% of the population, but a sheer 30,000, and these numbers are debated according to official statistics, it's 12,500, and some community leaders insist it's 45,000, so, but 30,000 is usually the number that most people agree on. Strolling through the city center, you can spot religiously dressed families, kosher restaurants and stores, and also non-kosher cafes named after famous Jewish figures, now known as streets in Tel Aviv. 2 mikvahs operate in the city. There are Jewish schools, 2 orphanages, headers, and even a Jewish university. Hotels that advertise their Jewish observant friendly services pop up on the web when you Google Jewish travel in Odessa. There is a salon on Jewish streets where observant women go to style their wigs and chat to one another, which they buy at the huge 7th kilometer or order from Israel. A number of my friends who wore headscarves when I met them have now upgraded to wearing wigs. For many young brides, these are gifts given to them before marriage by the community. Adding to the religious signs, many members of the Jewish intelligentsia are actively promoting Odessa as a city with textured history of Jewish presence. Their work is devoted to uncovering and popularizing the cultural history of Odessa through publications, organized talks, tours of cities' Jewish landmarks, and contributions to Jewish cultural organizations. Museum of the History of Odessa's Jews, set in a typical Odessan apartment tucked inside a courtyard, houses many historical relics, documents, and artifacts, even personal belongings of Jewish Odessans. Its online platform has allowed the museum to reach a wide network of subscribers, especially during the COVID pandemic when they've had to close their doors to visitors. In 2009, the Holocaust Museum was opened in the city by the Association of Ghetto Survivors of the Ghetto, focusing on the more horrific reality of Jewish life in the Odessa region. The city has 4 active Jewish religious congregations with several affiliated education facilities. Two of the largest communities are Orthodox, as I mentioned, Chabad Shomrei Shabbos, and Litvak congregation Tikva or Samech. Tikva claims to have 3,000 congregants, and Chabad says around 200 people turn to Shabbat services, about 1,000 attend high holidays, and close to 15,000 subscribe to their newspaper. Both of the congregations are headed by Israeli-born rabbis and a number of emissaries for Haim, as well as local teachers. In 2012, the conservative Masorti synagogue opened, and the Kehelat Tiferet congregation has nearly 60 congregants, as far as I'm aware now. By contrast to the past, Odessa's Reform Jews now occupy a relatively weak status. The dominant position of the two Orthodox congregations, especially the stronghold of Chabad, Lubavitch in the city, has led some scholars to point out the ironic renewal of Hasidism in a city that was always better known for liberal Jewish traditions. And indeed, in 2016, the city authorities have returned the building of the Brodskaya synagogue or Brody synagogue to the Jewish community, giving it to Chabad. And the Reform community has been battling to get this building back, and were extremely disappointed that at the end the building was given to Chabad. But although it is officially a Chabad property, it's still a state archive and has been for the last 5 years because they haven't been able to find a new place to move. Indeed, the Chabad rabbi told me that his colleagues around the world are jealous of the communities that he's been able to build in Odessa. Now a person can live a fully Jewish life in the city. And on the congregational website, the rebirth of Odessa is linked directly to the efforts of Rabbi Wolf and other emissaries and connected to the rich history of Odessa's prominent Jews. And a few citations from the website. With great toil and effort, Chabad Shlichim established a vast communal infrastructure. Today, Jewish life in Odessa has been reborn. He has spearheaded a wave of activities dedicated to saving the lives and souls of tens of thousands of people. And referring to the Chabad synagogue, the website states, today it is difficult to recall all of the Jews who attended the synagogue, but a partial list of some of those who live nearby include Dizenhov, Jabotinsky, Herzl, Pinsker, Bialik, Rivnitsky, Ayerhen, Dubnov, and Klausner. Now, despite this picture of Jewish success and continuity, it's important to point out that occasional episodes of anti-Jewish sentiment, sometimes including violence and hooliganism, were arising on Odessa even before the Maidan turn brought ultranationalism to the streets. In 2006, during my fieldwork, stones were thrown through a window of the Chabad congregation synagogue, and shortly after I left the field in 2007, 320 Jewish gravestones and Holocaust memorial were vandalized and painted with swastikas and anti-Semitic slogans. Many people I knew considered these tragic attacks to be out of the ordinary. For Odessa, these incidents were rarely discussed at length by either Jewish or non-Jewish Odessans. Most residents adamantly supported the rhetoric of tolerance as one of the city's chief characteristics. Now, tolerance and cosmopolitanism were indeed two traits often ascribed to the city by Jewish Odessans. It was in this way that they spoke to its distinct Jewish history, but these terms dominate the wider historical perspective about Odessa's Jewish past, while also playing a role in the way local Jewry positioned themselves and others, including foreign religious leaders, as either continuing or breaking away from these fundamental traits in the process of revival. During my time in Odessa, I saw local Jews and religious leaders use these terms and weave them into the personal and public narratives to confirm, question, and authenticate their own place in Odessa's Jewish space, and to draw parallels between Jewish revival, cosmopolitanism, and modernism. Odessa was, is, and always will be a Jewish city, one activist told me. Revival of Jewish life is a testament to the city's cosmopolitan ethos. Among those Odessans who believe their city to be Jewish is my friend Maya, an employee at the Migdal Jewish Cultural Center who is devoted to preserving its historical character. After noting the role played by Jews in the city's past growth, she moved to the present. And here I quote, first, compared to other ethnic and religious groups, Odessa's Abshina community is by far the most active and involved in the greater city life. For Maya, Jews' level of activeness was shown in the cultural programs they organized, such as classes, conferences, concerts, exhibitions, and publications. In Maya's view, the fact that non-Jewish Odessans welcome Jewish festivals, and here she went on to list the Jewish Diaspora Festival, Klezmer Festival, the Jewish Film Festival, and religious celebrations in the city like Hanukkah, and at times even participated in them, also demonstrated Odessa's status as an open, tolerant, and cosmopolitan place. She also reminded me of Группа Толерантности at the early Jewish development program called Mazel Tov, organized for non-Jewish toddlers whose parents want to bring them to Jewish nursery, believing they had good education. Maya highlighted the position held by local Jews in Odessa's political and economic structures. And here I quote, "Many of the city's deputies are Jews," she pointed out, and the mayor at that time, Gurvitz, is Jewish. This couldn't happen in any other city in the ex-Soviet world. What's more, she said, Jews owned many local businesses and thus helped support the local economy. They could also conduct business internationally because of the network created by all the Jewish Odessans now living in other countries as a result of migration. Though Maya highlighted the important role played by Jews as politicians and entrepreneurs, she also recognized the rise of Jewish self-awareness. Recalling this process, strengthening of Евреи Кости, she concluded there may be fewer Jews in the city today, but they have stronger Jewish identity. Maya judged Odessa's Jewishness by the extent to which Jews and their activities had been accepted and absorbed into the larger realm of the city culture. In other words, the acceptance of Jewishness confirmed the city as a tolerant and cosmopolitan place. And a lot has already been said about the use of Yiddishisms in the Odessa language in previous talks. So just wanted to point out that the fact that non-Jewish Odessans use Yiddish words like Maise and Gesheft and expressions Shtob ya tak žil, and many others were also highlighted as evidence of the penetration of Jewish quote-unquote qualities into non-Jewish spaces. And of course, Jews often pointed out that all Jews were familiar with Jewish cuisine. Gefilte fish is a dish that everybody knows in all of the restaurants in Odessa, Rabbi Rov of the Litvak synagogue said in an interview. Recalling the long lines outside of the synagogue for matzah before Passover, he made a point that real Odessan locals know that when Passover comes, everyone comes to the synagogue to buy matzah. Some residents and visitors alike like to exaggerate the Odessan myth, like the Ukrainian taxi driver who once told me, in Odessa, everybody's a little bit Jewish and a little bit of everything else. But he's not the only one. Many visitors and other local scientists have pointed out that while on the one hand, mixing of cultures is stressed, on the other, the important role Jews played in the city and the strong influence of Yiddish culture on the development of what is felt to be distinctly Odessan is virtually always cited. And here I'm referring to Richardson. Of course, when Odessans use the term Jewish to describe their city, it doesn't literally mean that only Jews live there, or that they dominate the place in any significant shape or form, especially given their low numbers in post-Soviet era. Rather, this stereotype is a metonym for the city's cosmopolitanism and tolerance and does not cloak its other characteristics or inhabitants. The media has also played a paramount role in depicting Odessa as a city that throbs with Jewish life and draws Jewish visitors from around the world. In 2018, for example, Haaretz used a headline, "Odessa, the cradle of Israeli culture, enjoys a Jewish renaissance," to dovetail Odessa's Jewish history and the qualities its contemporary culture shares with and offers to Israelis. Similar claims about Odessa's Jewish renaissance were streamed on the Israeli media channel IL TV in a short report titled Odessa, Ukraine experiences Jewish Renaissance. Did you know that Odessa, Ukraine was once home to one of the most important Jewish communities on the planet? This story gave a broader vision of Odessa's historical importance, especially for the Zionist movement and contemporary revival. In the segment, Rabbi Rov of the Litvak synagogue explains that over the years, most Jews have emigrated to Israel, United States, or Germany, but Odessa has remained a Jewish city. It is truly a place that draws back Israelis and Jews that want to do business, the Chabad rabbi concluded. This legendary myth of the city has, not surprisingly, been picked up by the tourist industry, which turned Odessa's Jewishness into a brand. And if you walk down in the city market, you can find little matryoshkas, wooden dolls, painted as a Hasidic household, and other little figurettes of Jewish jewelers and scholars next to fake passports where they write Odessit under nationality. The city has also produced City Guide to Jewish Odessa, published in English and Russian. Thus we can see the process of Jewish revival defined the cosmopolitan ethos of Odessa by bringing Jewish culture, cuisine, language, and religious ceremonies into the public realm of the city. Jewish revival in Odessa is not a unified, concrete process, but rather porous, ever-changing, and evolving reality influenced by international Jewish organizations, competing agendas, global and local politics. And now I want to turn to the next section, which frames the point of view more Jewish, less cosmopolitan. As Odessa's Jewish religious landscape becomes dominated by Orthodox Judaism, the questions of tolerance, cosmopolitanism, and openness resurface in the contestations of various models of Jewish moral codes. This is especially evident in Jewish education. Some interlocutors feared that Jewish schools and the values they taught children separated Jews from others and would thus undermine the specific quality of Odessa's sociality and urban diversity. For some members of the local intelligentsia, being cosmopolitan meant having a circle of friends from many nationalities, not just Jews. In such circles, they contended, relationships were based on personal interest rather than on loyalty to specific religious or national group. One elderly woman told me that new Jewish religious leaders were undermining this Odessan accomplishment by speaking and acting against assimilation. Another man went as far as stating that he distrusted religious leaders as much as he distrusted politicians. In his view, rabbis and Ukrainian politicians were trying to turn Odessa Ukrainian and Orthodox, two features that were never part of its primary identity. He saw their work as a contemporary struggle for power. Victor and Olga, who were in the late 80s when I interviewed them, said that they adamantly rejected the claim that contemporary Jewish activists, Jewish activists, who said they were restoring the lost and destroyed Jewish life of Odessa. They felt that the rabbis, a term they used loosely to speak of religious dressed Hasidic men, were pushing the Jewish population towards a new religious identity and connecting them to a set of values that were altering the city's cosmopolitan outlook. Victor and Olga defended the view that Odessa's Jews voluntarily gave up religious values, and even when I raised the fact that Soviet propaganda and fear of persecution played a role. And in this way, they often said that this was what made them modern. Other lamentations for lost cosmopolitanism expressed by local Jews focused on the issue of separate Jewish education. I have written elsewhere about Vyacheslav, a man who ran a math club in the city in the early 1990s, who saw the rise of Jewish education as a process where Jews and non-Jews will suffer from the lack of interaction, ultimately seeing each other as different. In his view, religious schools will erode the city's multiculturalism and cosmopolitan character. And here I have a quote from him. It used to be the case that everyone in Odessa had at least one Jew in their class. They knew what Jews looked like and who they were, either through close or even distant interaction. And he went on to list them. When he was a student, he had Ukrainian, Albanian, Greek friends, and that is no longer the case for kids that go to Jewish schools in the same way that kids in Jewish schools do not have Odessika, which is local education about Odessa. Echoing the comments of other assimilated Jews, Vyacheslav and others were ultimately concerned that Jewish institutions separated Jews from others. And in some families, children attended Jewish schools or where children attended Jewish schools or went to Jewish camps, there was a concern that religious values adopted by the children in Orthodox Jewish settings do privilege a bond to Jewish people over others. And this was all the more concerning for families of mixed ethnicity and religions. But by the same token, these new bonds and transnational relations forged by students in classrooms and beyond were valued by many of the students I met who loved learning Hebrew, Jewish traditions, and prayers from their Israeli teachers. They dreamed about their study abroad program and connected to Jews from around the world on their visits to the city. Their exposure to Jewish world culture and education was an aspect of Odessa's newer cosmopolitanisms, and that the older generation of Jews deemed as a threat or as foreign, but were nevertheless part of Odessa's milieu. And just in conclusion, one last thing, I know my time is running out. Myth of tolerance and cosmopolitan ethos are not indestructible. and the actual practices and understandings of Jewishness and cosmopolitanism among Odessa's Jewry appear to be in flux. Rabbis and emissaries from abroad bring a new dimension of Odessa's social constitution, and along with returnees and transmigrants, embellish the diversity of Odessa's city life. But some Odessans feel that these new models of Jewishness are creating a more isolated and insular vision of Jewish life in the city. Thank you.
Thank you, Marina. And the floor is open for questions. You must have been very clear because nobody wants to ask questions.
It's hard to ask questions, but people who are still there to answer them.
Okay.
Well, thank you. I hope I was.
I have a question.
Sure.
Can you see the effects of Jewish tourism to the Ukraine on the identity of Odessa Jews? Because you've got people coming to places like Uman, but also to Odessa. I know from Israel they've got quite a few tours going out every year, each and every year. So does it have any effect on the Jewish institutions in Odessa?
Yes. Thank you, Haim, for that question. Yes, I think it has a number of effects on the local Jewish population. And actually, I have a chapter in my future manuscript about Jewish philanthropy and what they call Jewish missions that come to the city. One thing is, I think Odessan Jews are now really good at displaying their Jewishness for those visits. So there's a lot of displays of Jewish culture, some of which I captured here, and this picture of Odessans, 4 children standing outside of the Migdal Cultural Center, holding challah bread and some Ukrainian vodka, dressed in Ukrainian and Jewish garments. Actually, the other side of that picture was 20 plus philanthropists taking picture of them. So it's quite interesting to observe the way that Jewishness is displayed. Now, the flip side of that is I heard a number of comments, people saying that they come here to look at how we live in a third world. And so they feel that they're perceived as sort of frozen in time and space. And in some ways they think, this really offends some people that partake in various ceremonies. For instance, I was part of a Holocaust ceremony put on for American philanthropist, and one of the elderly Jewish men said, well, why didn't they have anybody from Odessa speaking about their experiences? Why was it the American delegation highlighting historical facts and not somebody local? So there's a lot of conflicting issues that, or emotions, different emotions that arise within the local Jewish community. Some of them are excited to meet visitors, others are kind of tired of being observed, and yet others are sincerely offended by kind of the way that they're seen as the Jewish relatives that didn't make the boat to America or Israel. But I think it's definitely created an arena of display. It's also, as I mentioned, the tourist industry has really picked up the fact that lots of Jewish travelers want to see Odessa that are not necessarily from Odessa, but they connect their Jewish heritage to Ukraine and therefore come to see Jewish Odessa as part of their trip. So it's enlarged that tourist industry as well. And I think put Odessa on the map, definitely through Chabad and Litvak congregations who both have very strong communities abroad who raise money for them through their orphanages. It also has placed Odessa as on the map of places in need and vulnerable places, which again has raised different emotions among Odessans themselves. So I think a lot to say on that front.
Okay, I've got 3 questions for you, Marina. One of them is from a fine. You seem to be, I'm sorry, asking for you, describing that what would a Gruber calls virtual Jewish tourism. Is there a similarity? Who are the Odessan Jews today? How many are in Israel, in America? Are there really poor Jews? Quite elaborated question.
Are there, sorry, what was the last part?
Can you identify them as poor Jews?
Sorry, the what Jews?
Port.
Port Jews. Sorry, I apologize about that. Yes. Good question. So there's Odessan Jews. There's little Odessas, as we know, in New York and San Francisco. Now they say even in London. So I don't have the exact statistics. I know that there were around 95,000 the brink of the Soviet Union collapse. So I don't have the specific numbers of Odessan Jews who immigrated to the US or Israel or elsewhere. I do want to say that a lot of them have since also remigrated and have changed their destination. So I think little Odessans keep moving but keep connecting. I find that they are extremely connected to their city, both older generations, middle and younger Jews. And therefore it continues to define them who they are. Are they poor Jews? I think that they definitely identify with the poor as part of their identity. So in that regard, yes, they are poor Jews, but I think there's many things you can say on that topic.
Okay, I think that we've got quite a few questions, but I think that we are running out of time. So
we have about 5 to 8
okay,
minutes.
we've got 5 minutes. Okay, so we could bring Alexis' question. What is the stand of Odessa Jews vis-a-vis the Ukrainian-Russian conflict?
Very good question. Thank you. Yes, thank you. Thank you for asking that. And it was initially part of something I wanted to talk about, but it was a big topic to put in this paper. I traveled back to Odessa in 2009 and 2014, and on my last visit, I was quite taken to see the way that a lot of my friends who were very apolitical during the time that I lived there in 2005 to 2007 have became quite active. Some of them active in self-defense leagues and resistance movements, others in helping refugees that came to the city. I've definitely seen a lot of Odessan Jews become part of the Ukrainian project. And obviously after the horrible Odessa fire, people really questioned where they stood and who they were aligned with. I've seen those politicized conversations die down on one front, in the sense that they felt part of Ukraine, but nonetheless spoke Russian, while others sort of adamantly chose to switch to Ukrainian, and so on and so forth. Now, I remember the Chabad rabbi telling me that the right-wing organization that they were so fearful of came to support him and said, "We will offer you protection if anything happens and there's intrusion in the city," and to which she said, gladly, and sort of made a joke to me to say, obviously everyone was trying to find an ally in this conflict. But the protection came from the right-wing organization. Disturbing things were then happened on the anniversary of this fire, and 5 years after the fire, there was a mass protest in the city where the speaker said, "We'll claim Odessa back from the oligarch and the Zhids." And so, again, the loyalties that were built in the midst of the conflict were fragmented, and I think things will continue to change. But I think it's definitely made Odessan Jews part of the Ukrainian project, but have since then things have revealed themselves differently and continue to do so.
Okay, Alexis has another small questions. How do the Jews of Odessa nowadays relate to the poet of a Jewish origin, Boris Charnowski?
I'm sorry, say that again.
Boris Charnowski.
Chersonsky,
Sorry.
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Yeah, how do the Odessa Jews relate to Boris Chersonsky, the poet from a Jewish origin?
I didn't hear anything about him,
Okay.
Jews of Odessa, so I wouldn't be able to comment on that.
Okay. So I think that's about the time we have. I'm very thankful to both presenters and thank you for attending.
Thank you very much, Haim, for chairing this session. And thank you to both presenters. This has been really fascinating look into Odessa cosmopolitanism, rather post-cosmopolitanism that Vera Sapritsky has written about, and she'll be presenting tomorrow. And that reminds me that tomorrow we will be meeting at 4 o'clock, Moscow, Odessa, Jerusalem time. And I do ask everyone, please, to identify themselves with their name when they enter the waiting room to avoid any delay. This is a security measure that unfortunately is necessary. And I just wanted to say that what we heard today, I think, is pushing us not only into the 20th century, but also into a larger perspective beyond Odessa. We heard about Vilna, and I know that Svetlana Natkovich will be able to tell you much more than I can, but I think it's a trope of Odessa Hebrew literature or narrative, and that Vilna is the more conservative city, the Jerusalem of Lithuania, the opposite to Odessa, and that was, of course, one of the topics of early Hebrew novels about Odessa. Like, Brandes is from the two extremes, which they are so both. And I think that might be an Odessa trope, I'm not sure. But it means that we do need to to zoom out, and that's what we're going to do tomorrow. We're going to look at Odessa from a Georgian perspective, a Caucasian perspective, and we're also going to look at the 1905 revolution in a historical as well as literary perspective, and we will end with a roundtable on cosmopolitanism. So there's still a lot to come, and I look forward to seeing you again tomorrow. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you to all the speakers and the chairs for making this a really wonderful, fascinating, interesting conference. Thank you. And again, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night, wherever you are. Keep well and keep safe.